Somewhere in a museum drawer, there is a leg bone from a person who died thousands of years ago. And if you handed it to a scientist today, they could tell you something uncomfortable. That bone is thicker, denser, and stronger than yours. Not because that person trained for it, because of how they lived every single day. So here is the question. Ancient people had no gym, no weights, no protein powder, and often barely enough food. So why does their skeleton look stronger than ours? Start with the fact that bone is not a dead scaffold. Bone is living tissue, and it responds to what you do to it. Push hard on a bone, again and again, and it lays down more material and gets denser. Stop loading it, and it quietly gives that strength back, because holding on to it costs energy. That is why astronauts lose bone in orbit, and why a limb in a cast comes out thinner. Your skeleton is constantly negotiating with your life. And that means bone keeps a record. Where a muscle pulls on bone, it leaves a mark, and a bigger, harder-working muscle leaves a rougher, more pronounced ridge. So researchers can pick up an ancient bone and read it. How thick the walls are, how the shaft is shaped, how aggressive the muscle attachments look. And across a huge span of prehistory, those bones say the same thing. These were physically powerful people. The shape of the shaft matters too. A bone that gets loaded from many directions, over rough ground, tends to be rounder and more rigid, built to resist twisting and impact from any angle. Researchers also find something else in ancient skeletons: healed fractures, worn joints, ribs and limbs that broke and knitted back together while the person kept living. That is not a detail to skip past. It tells you these bodies were strong because they were being tested constantly, sometimes past the point of injury. Now here is the study that really makes the point. Researchers at Cambridge compared the arm bones of prehistoric women from early farming societies against the arm bones of living women, including competitive athletes. The prehistoric arm bones were, on average, stronger than those of modern rowers, which is remarkable because rowers trained specifically to load their upper bodies. And those ancient women were not athletes. They were doing ordinary work, which tells you something important about what ordinary work used to mean. A huge part of it was grinding grain, kneeling at a stone, pushing another stone back and forth, hour after hour, to turn hard seed into something a family could eat. That is a repetitive, loaded, upper body movement performed for a large part of the day, most days, for years. No one called it training. It was just what had to happen before anyone ate. And that is the pattern behind all of this. Ancient strength was not built in sessions. It was built by a life that never stopped asking for physical effort. Think about what a normal day required. You walked, and not around a block. Foragers regularly covered long distances looking for food and water over uneven ground, in bad weather, carrying whatever they found. And carrying is the part we forget. There were no wheels for most of this story, no carts, no bags with padded straps. If something needed to move, a human body moved it. Water, firewood, stone, meat, children. Every one of those is load-bearing work, and load-bearing work is exactly what builds dense bone and functional strength. Then there was digging. Roots and tubers do not lift themselves out of hard ground. That is hours of bracing, levering, and pulling with your whole body. There was processing, scraping hides until they were soft, pounding food, knapping stone, splitting wood, repetitive resistance-heavy work with the hands, arms, back, and grip. And there was climbing, wading, hauling, lifting, and holding still under strain, which is often harder than moving. Even resting was different. With no chairs, people spent enormous amounts of time in deep squats, kneeling, and sitting on the ground, which keeps hips, knees, and ankles loaded and mobile instead of folded into the same shape all day. And the hands. Almost every ancient task ran through the grip. Holding, twisting, scraping, pulling, carrying. Hands and forearms were under load constantly, in a way that is genuinely rare now. It also started early. Children were not spectators. They walked, carried, fetched, and helped. So bones were being loaded during the exact years when the skeleton is most responsive to it. And it applied to everyone. This was not a story about a few strong hunters. The evidence points to demanding physical work across the whole group, women included, which is exactly what that arm bone study shows. Put it together and you get something modern life almost never produces. Constant, varied, whole-body physical load from childhood until the day you died. There was no off-season. There was no rest day. Unless you were injured or the weather made work impossible. The body adapted because the body had no choice. But now we need to be honest. because this is where the internet usually gets it wrong. Ancient people were strong, they were not bodybuilders. That distinction actually matters. The huge, sculpted look people imagine requires two things ancient life could rarely provide: a reliable calorie surplus and enough spare energy to build and carry extra muscle. Muscle is expensive. It costs energy to grow and energy to maintain. If your food supply is uncertain, carrying a lot of extra bulk is a liability, not an advantage. There is also no evidence anyone was trying. Nothing in the record suggests people were building bodies on purpose, the way we do. Strength was never the project. Getting through the day was. So what the bones suggest is not size for its own sake. It is density. Thick walls, powerful attachments, tough joints, and enormous endurance. Think wiry, hard, and durable rather than inflated. Built for a full day of work, not for a photograph. And that is a more impressive kind of strength, honestly. It is the strength of a body that could work all day, walk 20 miles, carry a load home, and do it again tomorrow. Now here is the part of the story that surprises people most. Human bones got weaker over time, and it happened before anyone had a couch. As people shifted from foraging toward farming and settled life, researchers see a broad decline in bone strength in many populations. Farming is hard work, so this seems backwards at first. But farming changed the kind of work. It became more repetitive, more local, and above all, it involved far less walking across wild, uneven ground. Less varied loading meant less stimulus, and bone gave back what it no longer needed. Then, over thousands of years, the trend continued as work became more settled, more specialized, and more sedentary. Early farming often came with other costs too. Diets narrowed around a few staple crops, and in many populations, researchers see signs of nutritional stress and, in places, people growing slightly shorter than the foragers before them. So the picture is not simply that people got lazy, life reorganized, and the body followed the new demands rather than the old ones. We did not lose strength suddenly. We traded it away slowly in exchange for stability, surplus, and comfort. Which brings us to now. You almost certainly eat more protein and more total calories than any of your ancestors could reliably get. You have access to equipment engineered specifically to load your muscles, and knowledge about training they could never have imagined. And yet the average modern skeleton is less dense than the average prehistoric one, because the thing that built them was never a workout. It was a lifetime of unavoidable physical work. Their strength was not a goal. It was a side effect of survival. Nobody was training. Everybody was just living, and living was heavy. That is also why the comparison should not make you feel bad. You are not weaker because you are lazy. You are living in a world your ancestors would have considered a miracle. They carried water because there was no tap. They walked because there was no wheel. They ground grain by hand because there was no mill. Every bit of that strength was paid for in labor they could not avoid. We removed the labor, and we lost the side effect. That was mostly a very good trade. But it does leave one useful idea behind. Their bodies were not built by intensity. They were built by frequency. Not by an hour of effort a few times a week, but by movement threaded through every hour of every day. Walking, carrying, lifting, squatting, pulling, over and over for a lifetime. So the next time you see a reconstruction of an ancient human and think they look impossibly solid, remember what you are actually looking at. Not a training program, not a diet plan, just a body shaped honestly and completely by a life that required it.